Chris Smith on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
But as I mentioned to you last week on the show, fighters for freedom and bodily autonomy have just had a big victory with a recent judgment in the Supreme Court of Victoria. Victoria Police lost their Supreme Court case for charging and reprimanding police officers who refused the COVID jabs. Now, in this case, leading Senior Constable Simon Peter Shearer took the Chief Commissioner of Victoria Police to the Supreme Court after being charged and subsequently reprimanded for failing to receive any dose of the COVID-19 jab. Now, this is massive news, especially off the back of what the Supreme Court in Queensland ruled the previous month. Most mainstream legacy media, guess what they did with this major story out of the Supreme Court? Ignored it. They couldn't possibly go against the government narrative, not mainstream media. They're there to support government when they lie, when they tell us mistruths. My next guest has been following this issue very closely. Krystle Mitchell was acting Senior Sergeant with Victoria Police. After serving Victorians for 16 years as a police officer, she resigned over a matter of conscience in relation to policing of the COVID-19 restrictions. It was a dramatic way to make a point.
The deadline for essential workers needing their first dose is now less than a week away. A senior police officer has quit the force as she slammed the government for its handling of the COVID pandemic and vaccine mandate.
Acting Senior Sergeant Krystle Mitchell has gone rogue, outraged at Daniel Andrews' handling of the pandemic.
He is responsible for the increase in violence that has occurred. The police are now there to enforce a law that says, well, you're here and I have to arrest you and I have to fine you.
The 16-year veteran handed in her resignation after speaking out on social media.
All of my friends that are working the front line and are suffering every day, enforcing show directions that the vast majority, or certainly a great majority, don't believe in and don't want to enforce.
There you go. So it's based on lockdowns, COVID restrictions, and of course the restriction on the police themselves that they had to have a COVID vaccination. Krystle Mitchell joins us live from Melbourne. Krystle, welcome to TNT.
Thanks, Chris. First time. Happy to be here.
Good to have you with us. Well, this is such an important victory. What are the implications for other police officers who fought the jab mandate, such as yourself? What goes on from here, or is the Labor government and the police force too proud to admit defeat?
Well, I think yes, to your last part, too proud to admit defeat, but we'll wait and see. We've got a 4-week appeal period, which we need to wait and see what Victoria Police's response will be. In terms of how this will affect other police officers, this particular court case related to the Victoria Police manual and a policy that was implemented after the Chief Commissioner's instructions edict. So initially when the mandates came in, the Chief Commissioner issued what's called a CCI and said you must get vaccinated, and many members who refused were fired under the Chief Commissioner's instructions. After they got rid of the CCI, they brought in the Victoria Police policy on COVID-19 vaccinations, and that's what this police officer was fighting against. He received a reprimand for failing to receive the COVID-19 vaccinations under the VPN policy. And that's what the judge found in favour of the officer, that his failing to receive the COVID-19 vaccine did not breach the Victorian Police Manual. So there's a very interesting case here to look at and review any other police officers that either suffered a reprimand or were dismissed, or any other of the sanctions that you can receive under the disciplinary process, to see whether or not those police officers are also entitled to either some form of compensation or their jobs back, or for their reprimand to be quashed, as was in this case.
Well, their reprimand needs to be quashed, for starters, but whether they want their job back or their compensation, that's a no-brainer, isn't it?
I would have thought so. There's many police officers that don't want their jobs back. They do want compensation. There are quite a few that are still waiting for their jobs. And I'm really hopeful, Chris. This is a really positive win. And when I quickly crunch the numbers on the cases that have occurred here in Australia and a couple overseas, New Zealand and New York come to mind, we've got 8 wins in the win column and I think maybe 4 in the learnings. As Tony Nikolic said, we don't call them losses, we call them learnings. And every time there is a court case brought to court on one of these vaccine mandates, we learn something. We learn what the position is of the judges. We learn what it is that they say that we needed to do better on next time. And let me tell you, I think there are solicitors everywhere that are reading the ratio decidendi of all of these cases, and they are forming together strong to build more cases and bring them to court. I think right now, oh, sorry, you were going to jump in and say something there?
No. I'm just going to ask, if you wind back to when all of this was handed down, and I know that there was this incredible impetus to control the public, to make sure people were plastered in their lounge rooms, to make sure they got close to their family, which of course only spread the disease. And they couldn't go to the park and certainly couldn't go anywhere where there was open air, because although that was a good place to have any kind of flu, they didn't want you to do that. So when all this was going on, I understand the impetus to control everyone, including police included. But surely someone in the legal department of the Victorian Police Department should have done their due diligence and realised that any kind of edict to police about COVID vaccines was unlawful.
You would have thought so. And that's something that a few solicitors have mentioned, that just because the government brought in a mandate doesn't mean that every employer then had to go along with it. They did have a legal responsibility to get their own legal advice and make the determination as to whether or not what the government was saying was in fact legal. Not to mention the fact that many of these employers have fired and dismissed their employees as a result of refusing the mandates. But that was never an edict from the government. The government didn't say, if your employers don't get vaccinated, you have to fire them. So that's on the employers. And we're seeing cases throughout this country. We've had cases in South Australia, WA, Queensland, and New South Wales, and they are in the positive for people who have been vaccinated essentially against their will. We've seen 2 cases in the personal injury claim tribunal in New South Wales where 2 people who suffered psychological injury as a result of the pressure and the bullying to be vaccinated have won compensation claims against their old employers. And we will continue to see more of that, I think, as these cases progress.
This is a juggernaut, Krystle, isn't it? A juggernaut in favour of the rights of police officers.
Oh, absolutely. I think that if the courts did nothing for the next 10 years but assess the cases that are going to be brought forward in relation to mandates, everybody is going to have plenty of jobs, because the amount of grievances that exist in this context is just massive.
Yeah. What about the Queensland decision? That must have played some role in what happened in Victoria, surely.
That was in relation to human rights, and this case didn't touch on that. But
I'm with you.
I certainly think that there is a case to mount, because we do have human rights protections here in Victoria, and that will be a great challenge.
And in terms of the relationship between the public and police, I think the whole COVID pandemic lockdown period put a gigantic canyon between police and the public's faith and trust in police, and it wasn't the police fault.
No, but we were following orders does not cut it anymore, and I certainly would have thought that we would have learnt that from history. But Chris, the issue also is that whilst we've got people and police officers and public servants and civilians challenging mandates that no longer exist for them, in Victoria, firefighters and healthcare workers are still fighting mandates. They haven't stopped. They're being denied their ability to work in their chosen careers. And I think that it's really disappointing that the firefighter commanders that are in charge, I don't know what their rank structure is called, but that they're ignoring the overwhelming evidence that the COVID-19 vaccine did not do what the government promised that it would do. They promised it would reduce the spread and the lethality of COVID. It hasn't done that. So even if you believed that employers brought in mandates in good faith, thinking that it was the right thing to do, you can't possibly think that now when there is overwhelming evidence to support that mandates did not work. They didn't achieve the intended outcome. So why are you still doing that? And I think that it's because these employers, they are rats in a corner, and they are prepared to fight to the death instead of admitting that they were wrong. But Chris, if they want to play that game, well, let's play chicken. We're not moving.
That's very, very true. You make a couple of really good points. Now, the mainstream media's coverage of the Supreme Court victory in Victoria, it must have been massive, Krystle, was it?
Oh, yes. This the first big case for Victoria, a great, fantastic win. It was all over Channel 7, 9 and 10 and all of the other news channels. I don't think I've seen it anywhere. Not exactly.
I've seen it. I think it was
Sun.
printed in The Age. I saw it in The Age. I'm nearly sure it was mentioned in The Age. I might have been wrong. But the fact that they have gone on to ignore this is just testament to the mainstream media swallowing the government narrative. And even after the pandemic, even after what we now know to be true, they're still swallowing it.
Oh, absolutely. And look, it's going to get to the point where it's just undeniable and they are going to have to start talking about this. I mean, the fact that, we had our very first case in New South Wales way back in 2021, and it was Kassam v. Hazard, and they tried to fight in the New South Wales Supreme Court on the bodily autonomy, and the judge said that basically they lost the case because we didn't have a Bill of Rights. Fast forward to February 2022, and New Zealand High Court found in favour of police and defence because they had a Bill of Rights, and they said the mandates were in opposition to the Bill of Rights, and they won. Interestingly, in New York, they also found in favour of police, and the state was ordered to reinstate and back pay every single police officer that they fired over mandates. So this Bill of Rights issue really comes into play here, and it's something that I think that we need to start having a serious conversation about in the Australian context.
Yeah, we had a survey. We conducted a survey on this program last Wednesday on the Bill of Rights, and the overwhelming majority were in support of a Bill of Rights. I'd like to get your comment, Krystle Mitchell, on something that I noticed is occurring in New South Wales, and I think the same exists for fire brigade officers in Victoria. But the ridiculous situation where those who were sacked from their position as police officers because they wouldn't take the jab, they can't come back to the role they had or come back into the force anymore. But those who don't have the jab and are new entrants through the academy can join the police force in New South Wales. Don't you think that is totally and utterly ridiculous?
It is, absolutely. The fact is that you've got these police officers that have had their name tarnished. They were charged with a disciplinary offence. And I used to work at Professional Standards Command, the area that compiles the brief of evidence for discipline charges and criminal charges against police officers. And the serious misconduct and the gross misconduct charges that were essentially made up to support the refusal of a vaccine mandate were absolutely disgusting. Those charges are generally reserved for very serious internal offending.
Corruption.
Absolutely. Or for SALIS, which is our area that investigates sexual misconduct. Yeah. So these are charges that are generally reserved for very serious matters.
How ridiculous.
It is ridiculous, and you've got police forces all over the country bleeding staff. They've got not enough people to attend serious armed robberies, serious violent crime, and you've got these police officers that don't have any other job that they want to go into or that they feel that they have a skill set to go into. They just want to get their jobs back, and I just don't understand why we're not letting that happen. It's pig-headedness.
Just ridiculous. As Mike says on our chat box on tntradio.live, where is the Royal Commission into this?
Yes. Well, look, I just don't think that we're going to see one from a state-based perspective until we have a change of government in this state. Yeah. From a Commonwealth perspective, they did a very average one, in my opinion. It hasn't actually resolved anything. There's been no recompense for people that have suffered. We need a proper Royal Commission, and we need to make sure that this doesn't happen again, because we were supposed to learn our lessons. We haven't. By God, if we don't get this right, then what are we doing?
All right, another story today, and I'm sure you'll link this story to what your experiences have been, but 20% more sudden cardiac arrests are occurring in Victoria than 5 years ago. Mainstream media is now covering this, but they're dancing around the elephant in the room to what could have possibly changed over the past 3 years, Krystle, to cause such a spike in heart attacks. Like, you can't have your head in the sand. I'm sure that 100% of those spike in heart attacks are not caused by adverse reactions to vaccines, but don't tell me that some of them are not connected.
It's climate change, Chris.
Oh, that's right. Sorry. Yes. Sorry. I should have realised it's global boiling. You're right.
That's right. That's right. It's very concerning. I really hope that we do see a proper inquiry from a coronial inquest perspective into these deaths. I don't hold my breath, but, you know, we will persevere, and we just need to keep championing and speaking loudly about these issues.
You must, if you can find a media organisation willing to take your interview. Now, tell me, what are you up to now that you're no longer part of the police force?
I live on a farm in the Yarra Valley. So I'm busy tending to animals and a farmhouse, and just taking care of my husband.
Do you miss being in the force?
There's elements of my job that I miss, the camaraderie, the feeling of satisfaction when you do a good job. But of the coppers that are still in the job that I speak to, it sounds like a very different place to the one that I was a part of, and they're miserable. And I don't miss that. I don't miss the toxicity, the poor workplace culture of managers, poor decisions that clearly are still being made in the organisation today. So in short, I think that there's more ticks in the box of happy to be out than in the box of missing it.
Good on you. Yeah, I've got various contacts in the Victoria Police, and they say the same thing to me as well. Very much in the same vein. Thank you so much, Krystle. Much appreciated. We will be happy to take your interview on this network as often as possible. Whenever you have an update on in these areas, let's put it to where you won't get the same service elsewhere, though.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it, and I will certainly keep you updated in 4 weeks' time.
Thank you, Krystle. Much appreciated.